The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and bad news. I had been called in at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday with no warning, no agenda, and no explanation. My manager, Derek Owens, sat across the table with his hands folded neatly in front of him. The HR representative, a quiet woman named Lydia Park, sat beside him holding a thin manila folder. On the table between us was a single sheet of paper. I knew what it was before I touched it. A termination letter. Derek said the words slowly, like he had practiced them. We are restructuring the client services division. Your role is being eliminated effective immediately. I looked past his shoulder. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see the main floor. A woman I did not recognize was standing near my desk. She was laughing at something on her phone. She had a visitor badge clipped to her blazer, but she was touching my keyboard like it already belonged to her. I looked back at Derek. He did not flinch. I reached for the letter and read it carefully. At the bottom, I noticed the timestamp on my security badge deactivation. It had been done at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before this meeting even started. 2 days later, a company-wide email landed in my personal inbox. I was copied on it because I still had access to the group mailing list through an external account. The subject line read, "Welcome to the team. Introducing our new senior client director." Her name was Priya Walcott. The email described her as a seasoned professional with a strong background in client engagement and strategic growth. There was a photo attached. It was the same woman I had seen standing at my desk 2 days before. She had shoulder-length hair and a bright smile. The email was signed by Derek. I forwarded it to myself and archived it. At the office, I was told my former colleagues had barely reacted. A few had sent me private messages saying they were sorry. Most just avoided the topic entirely. That evening, I received a notification from our client management platform. Priya had just sent an introductory email to Hartwell Group, the account I had spent 3 years building from a cold inquiry into a $12 million annual contract. The email was polite. It was also generic, and it started with the words, "Hi there, I'm reaching out as your new point of contact. My name is Clara Mitchell. I am 39 years old, and until 11 days ago, I was the senior client director at Apex Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm in Atlanta, Georgia. I had worked there for 7 years. Before that, I spent 4 years at a smaller firm learning the foundations of client strategy and account retention. I did not inherit the Hartwell Group account. I built it. 3 years ago, Hartwell was a skeptical prospect who had been burned by 2 previous consultants. Their CFO, a careful and methodical man named Robert Hale, had asked for a face-to-face meeting before signing anything. I flew to their headquarters in Charlotte. I spent 6 hours with their team. I came back the next week, and the week after that. It took 4 months to earn their trust. When they finally signed, the contract was worth $4 million. By the end of year 2, through careful relationship management and strategic expansion, it had grown to $12 million. I was not just their account manager. I was their strategic partner. And beyond the career achievement, that account mattered to me personally. I had a mortgage. My mother's medical bills were mounting. I had no safety net. That job was everything. And Derek knew all of that when he handed me that letter. 3 years earlier, during the second renewal cycle with Hartwell Group, something unusual happened. We had just come through a difficult quarter. There had been a leadership change on their side, and 2 of my main contacts had left the company within the same month. The transition created real instability. Robert Hale, their CFO, had called me directly and said something I never forgot. "Clara, we don't have a relationship with Apex. We have a relationship with you." 2 weeks later, when renewal negotiations began, Robert's legal team submitted a revised contract. Buried in Section 4 was a continuity clause. It stated that Hartwell Group required Clara Mitchell to remain the primary strategic contact for the duration of any active engagement. In the event of her departure, The client reserved the right to initiate an early termination review. It was not a common clause. Most account managers never encountered one. I had never seen one before. I flagged it for Derek at the time. He waved it off. "It's just a formality," he said. He signed the contract without reading that section carefully. I signed as the named contact. The clause became legally binding. The current contract, with its renewal window opening in 6 weeks, still contained that exact language. Priya's introductory email to Hartwell Group sat unanswered for 4 days. That was unusual. Robert Hale's team typically responded within 24 hours. On the 5th day, a reply finally arrived. Not to Priya, to Derek. It was copied to Apex's general legal inbox, which was accessible to multiple senior staff members. I knew this because a former colleague named Tasha Reed forwarded it to me, quietly with a single line. "Thought you should see this." The email from Hartwell's side was brief but precise. "We noticed that Clara Mitchell is no longer listed as our primary contact. We would like clarification on this change, as it may have implications under Section 4 of our current agreement. Please advise." Derek replied before Priya could. He assured them the transition was seamless and that Priya was fully equipped to manage their needs. He did not mention the clause. He did not address Section 4. Within 2 hours, Hartwell's in-house legal counsel sent a follow-up email. It referenced the continuity clause directly and cited the specific contract language. It ended with a question that Derek had no clean answer to. "Can you confirm that the terms of Section 4 have been reviewed and honored in this transition decision?" Derek did not reply to that one quickly. My phone rang on a Thursday morning while I was at my kitchen table updating my resume. The number was a Charlotte area code. I answered on the second ring. It was Robert Hale. His voice was calm but direct, the way it always was when something bothered him. "Clara," he said, "I need to ask you plainly. Did you resign from Apex?" I told him the truth. "No, Robert. I was terminated." There was a long pause. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind where someone is processing information and deciding what to do with it. "I see," he said. "Were you given any prior notice or involvement in the transition planning?" I told him I had not. I had been handed a letter and walked out the same morning. Another pause. "Clara, we did not request this change. We were not consulted, and as of this moment, I am not comfortable proceeding with a renewal discussion through any other representative." He added 4 words that I wrote down the moment the call ended. "That is a problem." I sat very still after hanging up. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the contract I had saved in my personal cloud storage. I read Section 4 again, slowly. I began to understand exactly what was about to unfold. Here is what Derek never bothered to understand about the infrastructure behind the Hartwell account. When I built the relationship 3 years earlier, I also set up the back-end reporting systems. I had used my professional credentials to configure the client-facing dashboards, the quarterly data pipelines, and the renewal authorization portal that Hartwell's team used to process approvals. These systems were connected to a vendor platform that Apex licensed externally. The platform assigned user credentials based on named contacts listed in the active contract. Because the contract still named me as the primary strategic contact, the system had never been updated. It could not be updated without a formal contract amendment, and that amendment required either Hartwell's signature or a legal override process that would take weeks. What this meant practically was simple. When Hartwell's team went to initiate the renewal review through the authorization portal, the system prompted them for approval from the primary contact on file. That contact was still me. Not Priya, not Derek, me. The renewal approval could not move forward without my digital sign-off. I had not engineered this as leverage. It was simply what happened when a company fired someone without reading the contracts they had signed. The infrastructure did not care about office politics. Robert Hale did not take the matter to Derek's supervisor. He went directly to Apex's executive board. I learned this through Tasha who was feeding me careful updates from inside the company. Robert sent a formal letter to the board questioning Apex's commitment to contract continuity and client relationship integrity. He referenced the clause. He referenced the transition that had not been discussed with Hartwell's leadership. Then, he mentioned the renewal authorization issue, which his own IT team had discovered when they tried to initiate the process through the portal. The board convened an emergency session. $12 million in annual revenue had a way of making meetings happen quickly. During that session, someone asked Derek a simple question. Did you inform your superiors about the nature of your relationship with the new hire before approving her promotion into the primary account director role? The room went quiet. Derek had never reported it. Priya Walcott was his girlfriend. They had been together for over a year. Company policy required disclosure of any personal relationship that could influence a hiring or promotion decision. He had not disclosed it, not to HR, not to the board, not to anyone, and the timeline of his relationship with Priya overlapped directly with the period during which he had begun building the case to eliminate my position. HR opened an internal review the following Monday. I received an official call from the HR director, Calvin Osei, asking me to provide a voluntary statement about the circumstances of my termination. He was careful with his words, but I had worked in corporate environments long enough to understand what was happening. The review was not about me. It was about Derek. Calvin asked whether I had been given any performance-related documentation prior to the termination. I told him I had not. He asked whether the restructuring explanation had been accompanied by any written organizational framework. It had not. He asked whether I had been aware of any prior relationship between Derek Owens and Priya Walcott. I told him I had not been officially informed of any such relationship. Then I sent him the company-wide welcome email issued 2 days after my termination, with Priya's photo and noted the dates relative to my last day. I did not editorialize. I simply submitted the documents in chronological order. Calvin thanked me and ended the call. That afternoon, I learned through Tasha that Derek had been asked to present a timeline of his hiring decision process. His timeline had several gaps. The overlap between his relationship with Priya and the initiation of the restructuring plan was impossible to explain away. Derek expected me to react publicly. I understood that about him. He was the kind of person who prepared for noise. He had probably anticipated angry emails, social media posts, maybe even a call to an employment attorney. What he had not prepared for was silence. I did not post anything online. I did not email former colleagues. I did not reach out to anyone at Apex except to respond to official HR communications. I went about my days quietly. I updated my resume. I took walks in the morning. I had lunch with my mother on Wednesdays. On the surface, I looked like someone who had accepted a painful situation and was simply moving on. But beneath that stillness, I was watching everything carefully. Tasha sent me updates. Robert Hale's team had stopped engaging with Priya entirely. Their emails to her were going unanswered. Hartwell was a sophisticated organization with zero tolerance for fumbled communication. The account was in visible distress, and Priya did not have the institutional knowledge to stabilize it. She did not know the internal language Robert's team used. She did not know the history. She did not know which issues were sensitive. Then came the message I had been waiting for. Robert Hale's executive assistant sent me a meeting request for the following week. The meeting invitation came through my personal email on a Friday afternoon. The subject line read simply, "Confidential, options discussion." It was structured as an exploratory session, and the language of the invitation made the nature of it clear. Hartwell Group was not interested in discussing how to fix the situation at Apex. They were interested in discussing what options existed outside of Apex. Robert's assistant noted that the meeting would include Robert Hale, Hartwell's chief operating officer, and one of their board advisors. They were not bringing their everyday team. They were bringing decision makers. The meeting was set for for a Tuesday in Charlotte. They offered to cover travel. I booked my own flight. When I arrived at their offices, Robert met me at the reception desk personally and walked me to the conference room himself. Over coffee, before the others arrived, he spoke quietly. "We have worked with many consultants, Clara. Good ones. But we built what we built with you, specifically. That matters to us." He paused. "We would like to explore whether we can continue that work, regardless of what happens at Apex." He was asking whether I would consider leading the engagement as an independent consultant. I did not say yes immediately. I had learned over my career that the first offer on the table was rarely the right one, and that measured patience communicated confidence better than enthusiasm ever could. I asked for 2 days to review what I had in mind. Robert nodded like he had expected that. When I came back 2 days later by video call, I had drafted a proposal built on 3 components. First, a monthly retainer covering strategic oversight and executive advisory. Second, a performance-based revenue share tied to growth milestones. Third, defined decision-making authority on strategic initiatives, meaning I would not be reduced to an advisor whose recommendations others could override. I was not asking to be a contractor. I was proposing to function as a strategic partner. Robert reviewed the document while I waited. He asked 3 clarifying questions. I answered each one directly. Then he said, "I think this works." I kept my expression neutral until the call ended. Then I sat back and breathed slowly. I had just negotiated the foundation of my own business. The monthly retainer alone exceeded what Apex had been paying me in salary. And the revenue share, if Hartwell grew the way I believed they would, had no ceiling. Hartwell Group issued a formal non-renewal notice to Apex Solutions on a Wednesday morning. It was delivered by certified letter to the board and simultaneously emailed to the legal department. The letter cited concerns about contract continuity, undisclosed conflicts of interest in the transition management process, and a failure to honor Section 4 of the Active Engagement Agreement. It stated that Hartwell Group would not be entering into a new contract with Apex at the conclusion of the current term. The current term ended in 4 weeks. $12 million in annual revenue was walking out the door. I was not there to see the reaction, but Tasha described it in careful detail. The board meeting that afternoon ran for 3 hours. Senior partners who had never engaged with Derek directly were suddenly asking who had approved the termination of the account director. Derek's answers were not satisfying. The COO of Apex began pulling financial projections immediately. The Hartwell account represented 17% of the company's annual service revenue. Losing it would trigger a mandatory restructuring. An actual one, not the fictitious version Derek had used to fire me. Investors who held stakes in Apex's parent company were notified. The stock price of the parent firm dipped by mid-afternoon. 1 decimal point. But everyone in that boardroom knew what it meant. Derek was placed on administrative leave by the end of that same week. The notice was internal and quiet. No announcement. No explanation sent to the wider team. His access credentials were suspended. His calendar was cleared. Tasha told me that his office chair had been removed from the room by the following Monday, replaced by a folding chair, as if even the furniture had been issued a verdict. Priya Walcott submitted her resignation 4 days after Derek's leave began. Her letter, Tasha mentioned, was brief. She cited personal reasons. She had been in the role for less than 3 weeks. In that time, she had failed to respond adequately to 3 client inquiries from Hartwell, submitted an incorrect quarterly summary to their team, and missed a standing call that Robert's operations director had been specifically waiting on. Whether Priya had been manipulated by Derek or had knowingly participated in the conflict of interest, the outcome was the same. She was not equipped for the role. She had been placed there because of her relationship, not her qualifications. The account had suffered visibly in less than a month. Now she was gone, and Derek was suspended, and the client was already halfway out the door. The Internal Audit Committee which had been quietly activated 2 weeks earlier, began its formal review. The audit was methodical and unforgiving. The committee pulled email records going back 18 months. They examined the timeline of the restructuring proposal Derek had submitted to justify the elimination of my position. They reviewed the job description that had been written for Priya's role and cross-referenced it with my original job description. The similarities were unmistakable. They reviewed the performance records on file for me, which contained no documented warnings, no performance improvement plans, and no disciplinary history of any kind. They reviewed the termination process itself and found that proper procedures had not been followed. Specifically, there had been no independent HR review of the restructuring rationale before the termination was approved. The form required for that review had been bypassed. When they pulled the compliance sign-off sheet, they found Derek's own signature on it. He had approved his own compliance documentation. In a company with standard internal controls, that should have been flagged immediately. It had not been, because no one had looked closely enough until now. The committee also identified 3 separate emails Derek had sent to Priya in the months before my termination. 2 of them discussed the structure of the new role he was creating. One of them, sent 4 months before I was fired, referenced me by name and contained a sentence that the committee found particularly relevant. It read, "Don't worry, I'm handling it." The board met on a Thursday and voted to rescind Derek's leadership authority in full. The vote was not close. He would remain on administrative leave, pending the conclusion of the audit and any legal processes that followed. His direct reports were reassigned. His projects were redistributed. His name was removed from the company website by the following morning. Rumors spread through the office the way they always did, in whispers near the coffee station and in private messages sent from personal phones. Some people were shocked. Most were not. Derek had always operated in a way that prioritized his own comfort over institutional integrity. People had noticed, but no one had moved against him until the numbers were at risk. That was how corporate accountability usually worked. Tasha sent me a simple message that evening. The building is different without him. Lighter, somehow. I appreciated the honesty. I did not feel triumph. I felt something more like quiet resolution. The renewal deadline arrived 3 days later. It came and went without an extension request, without a counteroffer, without a last-minute intervention from any senior leader at Apex. Hartwell Group did not renew. The $12 million was gone, and the board was left standing in the wreckage, asking each other how it had come to this. Hartwell Group formally withdrew from the Apex Solutions client portfolio on the last business day of the month. Their legal team sent a clean disengagement notice. No dispute, no arbitration, just a quiet, professional exit that made the entire situation more damning. For Apex, the financial impact was immediate. Their quarterly earnings report reflected the loss. Revenue projections were revised downward. 2 senior partners issued a joint statement describing the quarter as challenging and citing a strategic shift in client mix. It was the kind of language companies used when they wanted to obscure the specific cause of a failure. But the financial press was not easily redirected. One business publication ran a brief item noting that a major long-term client had declined to renew and that the departure was linked to a personnel transition. They did not name anyone. They did not have to. The stock of Apex's parent company dipped again, a slightly larger dip this time, enough to register on a trading screen and prompt questions from 2 institutional investors. Within 48 hours of the earnings release, I received 2 phone calls. They were not from journalists or former colleagues. They were from clients. 2 of them. Both were asking for meetings, and both requests came with an urgency that told me exactly why they were calling. The 2 clients who reached out were Meridian Health Partners and Castleford Logistics. Both were accounts I had built personally during my time at Apex. Meridian was a 3-year relationship worth $6 million annually. Castleford was newer 18 months in, worth just under $4 million. Together, they represented $10 million in annual revenue. I had not contacted either of them. They had come to me. When I spoke with their respective account leads, the pattern in both conversations was identical. They had noticed the instability at Apex. They had seen the personnel changes. They had read enough between the lines of the earnings statement to feel uncertain. And then they asked the question that confirmed everything I had suspected. Both of them, independently and without coordination, asked me the same thing. Who is actually leading the strategic work on our accounts right now? They were not asking about job titles. They were asking about substance. They were asking whether the thinking, the preparation, the strategic insight that had shaped their experience with Apex had a name. And it did. It had always had a name. The relationship was not with the company. The relationship was with me, just as Robert Hale had told me 3 years earlier in Charlotte. I had built this, all of it, and now both clients were sitting on the edge of a decision. Castleford Logistics made their move first. Their COO, a direct and efficient woman named Petra Vance, called me on a Monday and said they would be delaying their upcoming renewal pending clarity on leadership direction at Apex. She used the phrase leadership clarity 3 times in a 7-minute conversation. It was diplomatic language for, we do not trust the organization right now. The delay put Apex in an even more pressured position. Their next renewal cycle was now in question, adding another $4 million in revenue to the pile of uncertainty. Meridian Health Partners had not yet made a formal move, but their communications with their Apex account team had slowed noticeably. Apex's board was now dealing with $16 million in active revenue risk within the span of 6 weeks. The internal pressure was severe. Multiple members of the Client Services Division were now working under emergency protocols, scrambling to stabilize relationships that had been quietly managed by one person for years. A board advisor reached out to Calvin Osei in HR and asked whether there was any legal exposure related to my termination. Calvin, to his credit, gave an honest answer. The exposure was real. The process had been flawed. The conflict of interest was documented. The board began the process of finalizing their decision regarding Derek Owens. Derek's termination was finalized on a Friday afternoon. It came via a quiet internal memo distributed only to HR and senior leadership. No company-wide email. No formal announcement. The memo cited ethics violations, specifically the failure to disclose a personal relationship that influenced a hiring and promotion decision, and procedural violations related to the termination of a staff member without proper independent review. He was dismissed without severance. His employment record would reflect the ethics finding. In the industry where reputation moved faster than formal references, that designation was more damaging than most people outside the corporate world realized. I heard about it from Tasha on a Saturday morning. She sent me a single sentence, followed by a period. No exclamation mark. No emoji. Just the plain fact of what had happened. I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and finished making breakfast. The satisfaction I felt was not the loud kind. It was the deep, quiet kind that settles in the chest when something that was wrong is finally made right. But I did not spend long sitting in that feeling, because the decision I had been preparing for over the past several weeks was now ready to be executed. The scaffolding was in place. The first client was already signed, and the name I had chosen for my company was already on the paperwork. Clara Mitchell Advisory launched on a Tuesday. I had spent 3 weeks before the launch registering the business, setting up the operational infrastructure, and preparing client onboarding materials. My home office had been converted into a proper workspace. I had a signed consulting agreement with Hartwell Group already in place, with the retainer set to begin on the 1st of the following month. The day I announced the launch through a simple LinkedIn post, I received 47 connection requests and 19 messages within the first 6 hours. Most were from former colleagues and professional contacts offering congratulations. but 3 of them were from potential clients. Real ones. People with budgets and problems they needed solved. I responded to every message, personally. By the end of the first week, I had signed a second client, a mid-sized logistics firm that had heard about my work through a contact in the industry. They needed a strategic review of their vendor relationships and a plan to consolidate their service costs. It was exactly the kind of work I had done at Apex for years. Within 2 weeks, Castleford Logistics, whose renewal delay was still creating pressure for Apex, reached out through a mutual contact. They wanted to know if my firm was in a position to take them on. I told them I would send a proposal by Thursday. I sent it Wednesday evening. Within 6 weeks of launch, Clara Mitchell Advisory had 3 active clients and a 4th in final negotiation. 2 former colleagues from Apex, both of whom had been part of my original team, reached out asking if there were opportunities to work together. One of them was Tasha Reed. I brought both of them on as senior associates. We were growing faster than I had planned, which created its own set of challenges, but also a very specific kind of energy. There was a momentum in the work that I had not felt in years. Meanwhile, Apex Solutions was navigating a difficult period. Their quarterly report had triggered questions from institutional investors. The board had replaced 3 members of the senior leadership team. Tasha had told me before she left that the culture inside the office had shifted noticeably. People were uncertain. Morale was low. The client services division, once the strongest revenue generator in the company, was operating under emergency protocols. An industry trade newsletter I read monthly ran a brief analysis piece about mid-sized consultancies losing key client relationships due to personnel transitions. They did not name Apex specifically, but the description was precise enough that several people forwarded it to me with no additional comment. Then the invitation arrived. A clean white envelope with a gold logo in the corner. The Atlanta Business Leadership Conference wanted me to be a keynote speaker. The conference was held at a downtown Atlanta hotel in a ballroom that seated 400 people. I had been asked to speak on client retention strategy and the long-term value of relationship-based business development. I accepted, prepared carefully, and arrived an hour early. The audience filled in steadily. Industry leaders, consultants, executives, financial directors. I scanned the room while waiting at the side of the stage. That was when I saw him. Derek Owens was seated in the 3rd row near the center aisle. He had no job title beneath his name in the printed program. He looked different, quieter. The confidence that had once made him difficult to challenge was gone. He was just a man in a suit sitting in a row. I straightened my notes and looked at the moderator, who nodded to signal 90 seconds to start. I breathed slowly. When I walked onto that stage and the room settled into attentive silence, I did not look at the 3rd row immediately. I looked at the full room and let the weight of the moment land. Then I began. I spoke for 40 minutes. At the end, the moderator opened the floor. A woman near the back raised her hand and asked a question about loyalty in professional relationships. The woman's question was precise. She asked how leaders could build genuine loyalty within client relationships in an environment where people and teams were always changing. I looked at her, then let my gaze move across the room. I answered by speaking about the difference between transactional value and relational value, between what a company offers and what a specific person builds over time. I said that clients do not forget who showed up for them. They remember who understood them, who learned their language, who stayed through the difficult quarters. Then I said the line I had not planned but that arrived fully formed. Never treat people like they are replaceable when they are the foundation. Because when you fire the foundation, the building does not survive. The room went still for half a second. Then someone began to clap. Then the full room was on its feet and the sound filled the ballroom, the way sound fills a space when something true has been said. I stood at the podium and accepted it calmly. 3 months later, Clara Mitchell Advisory surpassed the annual revenue of Apex's entire former client services division. The number was confirmed by a financial summary I reviewed on a Sunday morning at my kitchen table. I noted it. Then I closed the laptop and called my mother. The new office had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the city skyline. On the glass wall near the entrance, etched in clean serif letters, were the words, Clara Mitchell Advisory. Below the name in smaller text, Strategic Partnership and Client Excellence. 6 months after the conference, Robert Hale flew in from Charlotte for a strategy session. We sat across from each other at the long conference table, the same way we had sat in his offices 3 years earlier, except now the room was mine. The quarterly reports on the wall were mine. The team beyond the glass partition were mine. The agenda had been shaped entirely by my thinking. We spent 4 hours mapping out the next phase of our partnership. When we finished, Robert said with the same directness I had always respected, "I knew the first time we met that you were the one building this." I walked him to the elevator. On the way back to my office, I passed the etched glass and read my name without slowing down. No anger, no bitterness, no need to look backward. Derek had thought he was replacing an employee. He did not realize what he was actually doing. He was firing the infrastructure. And when you fire the foundation, the building does not survive. But the foundation builds something new, something stronger, something entirely its own.